Good afternoon and welcome to this week's edition of the Cards Court, recorded here in the Betsy M. Ross studios, as always inside Ball State Sports Link. I'm Griffin Leonard alongside Sam Neiger. Sam, how are we doing?
I'm great, Griffin. A lot to break down from this past week of Ball State basketball. 3-1 were the Cards this week over the past 4 games, so it seems that trajectory continues to go up and up as we carry on through this season. I'm excited.
Yeah, let's do it, Sam. Well, we have a fun show for you today. We're going to chat, as always, give our hot takes, reflect on what we said last week. We'll sit down online with Mark Foerster, who's called some of the men's basketball games this year for Learfield, and we're looking forward to that conversation. But let's get into it. Let's recap last week, and then we can move forward. So starting with last week's matchups, you look at the weekend, it was a doubleheader. Women's basketball beat Akron 80-57. Men's basketball took on Toledo at home at Worthen, fell short after a really good first half, kind of fell apart at the end of the game there, and ended up losing by 18 points. Turning to the long weekend, Martin Luther King Day, and a matchup for women's basketball against Toledo. That was a big game and a big win. The Cardinals beat the Rockets 77-63, and then the Cardinals men's team went on the road to Mount Pleasant, Michigan, to take on Central Michigan. They were leading big. They almost lost it, but they were able, by the skin of their teeth, to grind out a victory there in Mount Pleasant. They beat the Central Michigan Chippewas 82-80. Sam, let's go back to our bold predictions from last week, kind of put ourselves under the microscope here. We'll start with you for men's basketball.
Yeah, for the men's basketball side of things, I said a 2-0 week. I thought that was well within reason, and maybe through the first half of both of those games, you would have thought absolutely we were trending in the right direction, but the Cards let things slip on Saturday against Toledo in half number 2, ended up losing by double digits, nearly by 20 points. That's obviously not a score line that you love to see very often, Griffin, but I think their performance against one of the more recognizable brands, if anything, in the Mid-American Conference in Toledo was encouraging. They did obviously get that slim victory against Central Michigan to go 1-1, so I don't think I'm held contempt of court here.
Okay.
I think I'm all right in this one, but still not going to count it as a win, unfortunately, Griff. What about you?
Well, so for men's, I said we were going to have less than a dozen turnovers. We were trying to stress that. And the Cardinals showed up in that Toledo game in the ball handling category. Only 7 turnovers for Michael Lewis's team, which was the best we've seen in a while from them. Of course, they followed it up on Tuesday with 19, as we'll talk about later. But that wasn't part of my prediction.
Right, exactly.
So I'm giving myself a little tally for that one. Pretty happy with the way the Cardinals took care of the ball. How about the women's side?
So for the women's side, I said that we were going to see 2 double-double performances from the Cards during the game on Martin Luther King Day against Toledo. Now, that did not happen. There were 0 double-doubles, but I'm not going to hold myself in contempt of court here for the following reasons. Allie Becky, 26 points, 9 assists. She was 1 assist away from the double-double. Alex Richard, 12 points, 8 rebounds. She was just 2 rebounds away from a double-double. So I'm certainly not giving myself the win there, but I did argue with you a little bit before we went on the air. I'm not going to hold myself contempt of court there. We were just a rebound or 2 rebounds and an assist away. I think that's about as close as you can get without actually coming home with a prize.
Yeah, Sam, hanging on as a thread, or hanging on from a thread as always.
I guess so.
That's fair. Well, if you're talking about being close, then I really get to no closer than my women's basketball prediction for this week. Talking about the Toledo game, trying to get a 15-point win over the Toledo Rockets. They won by, of course, 14.
Yeah.
So pretty close, but a big win for the Cardinals. That's all that really matters at the end of the day. Really impressed with that performance. Let's start with the women's team this week, Sam. You look at those 2 matchups. Akron, certainly a game that was supposed to be a victory. They got it done in convincing fashion. But then Toledo, with the light shining bright, Monday morning on national TV, the Cardinals once again delivered.
And both of these were AM tips. The Cards were a little groggy in both of those games, at least in the first quarter, but by the end it was just business as usual. Even against a Toledo team that's given the Cardinals trouble in years past, it was really no contest by the second half. Ball State has proven that the Mid-American Conference is theirs to lose at this point. The only unchecked box would be Western Michigan at this point, and that's just because they're the lone top 5 team in the MAC outside of Ball State that Ball State hasn't beaten. And I think that they're not necessarily going to pose any kind of threat that the Cards haven't seen from the Buffaloes, Kent States, and Toledos of the world. So for Ball State to dominate and run it back, as it said on the T-shirts they were handing out to the fans, for them to run it back against Toledo on national TV and win by 14 points, to have Allie Becky drop 26 and garner some national attention, that was huge for Ball State, but we've come to expect that so often from this Cardinals squad.
Yeah, you mentioned a Western Michigan group that's only 8-9 this season. They've had a good start to Mid-American Conference
They've played really
play.
well in the MAC.
So we'll see what that team really looks like. There's so many question marks still in the late stages of January, but I think one thing that we can put an exclamation mark on at this stage is that Ball State women's basketball is the best team in the conference. I don't think there's much doubt about that, at least at this moment.
I'd have to agree with you, Griffin. Right now, there is no team that is going to pose something to Ball State that they haven't been able to overcome thus far this year. There's no team in the conference that is going to play Ball State any tougher than the Columbias or the South Dakota States or the Ohio States of the world, and those are the three big losses right now in my eyes. So unless some teams can jump to that level, it's Ball State's to lose in my eyes.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sam. And turning over to men's basketball, last week the big emphasis, at least talking between the two of us, was just this is the opportunity to get a big home win against Toledo. They couldn't get it done. But how about the response to go, and they were down early in that Central Michigan game.
Yeah.
They were down 10 in the first half, and it looked like, based on what we saw on Saturday, that it could have been really easy for the team to kind of just roll over, but that's not what happened.
Yeah, I was really impressed with how the Cardinals were able to respond and jump out to that big lead that they eventually lost, but did come up with the win, so regardless, a win is a win in the MAC at this point. I kind of harken back to what David Eha, the color commentator on Learfield and ESPN, says all the time for Ball State basketball, and especially about the MAC. The Mid-American Conference is about making sure you win at home and stealing a win every once in a while on the road. That's a recipe for success. That gets you in the tournament. That puts you in contention. Ball State did the complete opposite of that. They've had their worst defensive game by far at home against Toledo. Second game of a double-double, or a double-header, excuse me, on a Saturday. There was a nice crowd, and the Cards just could not get it done in half number two. Then they face all that adversity on the road. Central Michigan's not an easy road trip. There's no easy road trips in the MAC, and the Cards were still able to gut out a close win. It has me scratching my head, but it does prove that this Ball State team can win close games. It's just the next 4 games, Ball State has 3 on the road as well, so they're going to have to replicate some of that magic here moving forward if they're going to want to still be in contention to make the Mid-American Conference Tournament in late February.
Hey, right now the Cardinals look better on the road than they do at home. Like a road trip might not be the worst thing for the group right now.
That's true, and that's odd to say when this is usually a team that dominates at Worthen Arena. They have looked so good at home in Michael Lewis's tenure, especially. It's just they've allowed some of these teams to get the better of them. They've allowed the home crowd to not get behind them as much as they have in years past, and it's turned into some tough losses on the floor of Worthen.
I will say one thing I really liked from that game, the spreading of the scoring. You had 6 guys on the Cardinals team. In fact, everyone who scored and played more than 7 minutes in the game was in double figures for Ball State.
Huge.
We saw Jeremiah Hernandez have another really good game, Mickey Pearson continuing to step up, Peyton Sparks finding success down low, and at the free throw line. It's a team that's coming together as a collective. We're not having necessarily the level of individual star power that is maybe required in some of those bigger games, but the team collaborative effort that I'm seeing from this Ball State Cardinals team I think is the best we've seen in a season under Michael Lewis.
I think you can spin that stat either way you want because, yes, every player that scored had double digits, but only 6 players scored. You know, there's players like Ben Hendricks, Joey Hart, TJ Birch, no points. And yes, they all played less than 7 minutes, but that's because they weren't scoring the basketball. A 6-man rotation is not going to be a recipe for success in the conference. Is it going to steal you one on the road in must-win games like that? Every once in a while, and we saw that against Central Michigan, but that cannot be a consistent recipe that Michael Lewis uses. He's got to have more scoring production off the bench if he wants to be in contention.
That's a really good point, Sam. I'm curious what our guest Mark Foerster has to say about that this afternoon. We're going to step aside when we get back. We'll chat with Mark, and we'll keep things rolling here on the Cards Court, presented by Victory Honda of Muncie. Griffin Leonard, Sam Neiger. We'll be right back.
Victory Honda of Muncie. We're not just another car dealership, and here's why. We stand behind every car we sell and are dedicated to helping our customers save time and money. All our pre-owned cars undergo a rigorous 182-point inspection and come with a 90-day warranty to ensure that you're getting a Victory quality vehicle. Plus, you'll get 2 years of complimentary oil changes and tire rotations. We're part of a top 15 dealership group and have an enormous selection of vehicles with access to inventory at over 45 locations. You always get more for your trade and the best possible rates with us. We have an excellent relationship with hundreds of lenders. Our exclusive Car Doc maintenance and membership program will help you save hundreds of dollars in the process of maintaining your vehicle. Lastly, our state-of-the-art body shop and certified technicians perform high-quality repairs and paintwork on most vehicle makes and models. Victory Honda of Muncie. We're not just another car dealership.
Welcome back inside the Cards Court, presented by Victory Honda of Muncie here on SportsLink Digital. Our guest this week is Mark Foerster. He's a sports director at Wolf Boom Radio. He's called a couple of the men's basketball games this year for Learfield, and he's involved with a ton of stuff in and around the Muncie community. Mark, thanks for joining us.
You got it, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so Mark, starting off, you've been around the Muncie area for a while, but I know you're an Indy grad. How did you come to find Delaware County in the Muncie market?
Well, graduated from the University of Indianapolis and spent some time working part-time for some of the stations down in central Indiana, 1070 The Fan, 93.5, and a little bit of WIBC down there. And so connections just kind of took place there that allowed me to get to know a little bit of Wolf Boom Radio up here. And so I've been here since 2014, so coming up on 11 years. And so it's amazing in this business, as you guys well know too, the connections run very deep, and you never quite know where those connections will take you. And glad I landed here. This is a great community, and it's good to be around the Ball State sports scene as well.
Mark, I love it when we have on members of the local media, because I get to ask them this question: why is local media important? Why is local sports coverage important to you specifically?
Ooh, great question. We could be here for probably a couple hours talking about this. I think this day and age, local coverage has certainly, the landscape has changed a lot over the last decade. A lot of video has been integrated, especially with social media, podcasts, similar to what you guys are doing as well. I think one of the things, and obviously I'm biased being on the radio side, is that radio in local areas such as this area has really not changed. Our impact is what it's been for decades on decades, and having that longevity of before I was here, of history to come to the news and sports and information that way. I think our market's a little unique in that regard. So my perspective's only really where I've been, and the Indy area's changed. Muncie, radio's been so prevalent here. So, but kind of to your point about local media and local voice, it's about relationships, right? So we're the ones with the feet on the ground, having relationships with coaches, administrative staff, et cetera. And anybody from a national perspective, and I'm not here to say that national writers don't have relationships, but their relationships are very, very different. And so we have the ability in our market, just like any other market our size, to really have relationships and get to know information, and to distribute it in a positive way, and distribute it in a way that's constructive, because as we well know, social media is a great tool, but social media can also be used for not so great news gathering purposes. So I'm very passionate about local media. Obviously, coming from Indy and coming to here, my eyes were opened a little bit of what I thought a market this size was, and now I'm in this market 11 years, and local is truly all about this community. That's why I love still being here. So.
Yeah, now, Mark, tell us about your radio show, because I'm sure some of our viewers are familiar with it, but it's all encompassing, isn't it? Pacers, Colts, but then you also cover Ball State. You also cover some of the local high schools. How did that get started?
Yeah, so when I got here in 2014, really the primary focus was really bolstering our high school sports coverage. And now going on 11 years, that audience continues to grow, and our relationships with the schools, going back to that relationship word, has been super key. And so we always wanted to add more and have local sports show like you said, Griffin. There's not many towns in Indiana that has a Division I university right in their backyard. And there's so many different stories, not just basketball, football, and the major sports that people tend to talk about mostly, although that content is pretty prevalent on my show. Um, this community cares about the Colts. This community cares about the Pacers. We saw that with their run last year, Indianapolis 500. So we try to blend all the local things that we have here, but have a voice as well here locally for some of those national, statewide type of conversations as well. And so that was integrated in 2016, and then it became a full-time show Monday through Friday. We started on only Wednesdays on what was WXFN, what now is WMUN. And so basically turned that into a Monday through Friday show, April of 2018. So coming up about 7-ish years on that. So it's been quite a ride. We've covered the Andrew Luck retirement fun. We've covered quite a lot of disappointments with the Indianapolis Colts in a more positive sense. We've had opportunities to talk to coaches after championships. We've been able to cover Wapahani going to the state championship last year in basketball. So there's been equal amount of parts of some negative, but some positive. And, we always just say, hey, we're going to be honest and try to give our perspective and allow people to have their platform to be able to talk about those things here locally.
And Mark, you've been involved a little bit more with the men's team this year than the women's, filling in on Learfield Radio, calling some of the games. You talk about that honesty. What is your honest assessment of this Ball State men's basketball team at this point in the season?
I think they're a top half of the league team. I think they've got the talent to do that, and clearly in some of their higher level performances on both ends of the floor, this is quite a group that I was going through it yesterday actually, and just looking at the starting lineup and saying, you have two players in that lineup, and Mickey Pearson Jr. and Jeremiah Hernandez, that literally, no matter what game it is, you know exactly what you're going to get from them. Likely double figures, likely 4 or 5 rebounds. In Mickey's case, he's probably going to go, 5 for 6 from the free throw line. And Jeremiah Hernandez has really been nice. So it's nice to have those steady players. Clearly, Jermari Hill can have those big moments. He's had some moments, obviously, where it's been tough when the lane's been kind of clogged, because that's where he really thrives. Then you've got your shooter in Gorosito, who obviously had a hot streak several weeks back, but so steady in the lineup. And then you've got the biggest matchup problem that I think you go into every game with Peyton Sparks. So you've got all that you need, and that talent on both ends of the floor, I think, puts you in a top 5 conversation in the Mid-American Conference. And so, I think part of the frustration from Michael Lewis early on with this team and last week was he knows deep down that this is a group that has the ability to do what they did on Tuesday night, have the ability to beat Bowling Green like they did, win that opening game against Kent State. So it's a frustration of, not that they don't have enough, it's a frustration of he knows that what this team has. And so, I think that middle of the conference is going to be right around that 500 mark for the majority of conference play. But I have every confidence that Ball State can be there. But again, it's on them to be able to have that consistency. And that word consistency is probably tiresome for that team and coaches and hearing that, but they know it. There's got to be a more consistent effort. But at the end of the day, they are just as talented as the teams at the very, very top of this league.
So you talk about consistency, and yeah, it might be a redundant point, but it's important, right? And we were talking about it earlier on the show today. It's almost backwards of what you'd expect as far as when Ball State has gotten their big results so far this season. They've done the majority of their hard-hitting efforts and their bigger wins on the road. I know the majority of your coverage has been home radio for a couple of these games, so you've been there firsthand when maybe a couple of these efforts have fallen short. Why do you think that the Cardinals have not been able to replicate their road success here at home at Worthen Arena?
It's a good question. It's funny because my first game this year was the Detroit Mercy game, and that was just kind of after the game. You just like, okay, so what what's the road look like after this? And then I came back right before the new year and did the Evansville game, and that was as perfect as it was. And I think at the time when they beat Evansville, you're wondering, ooh, man, Evansville got hit pretty hard by the transfer portal. They had some injuries. Maybe that was just one of those performances. But still, I mean, when you win by 35 plus, you feel pretty good about where you're at. And, right after that, Evansville goes and wins 3 straight in the Missouri Valley Conference. And so that happens. And then, of course, the Bowling Green one that I've been able to see, and I've watched many of these other games as well. I just think, like you said, Griffin, it comes to the word consistency. They're very good at bouncing back from adverse moments. And I think Tuesday night probably was one of the most adverse moments they've had throughout this entire season, being down double figures on the road with 14 minutes to play and having to do something that's a little bit more difficult than what they've done in some of their comeback wins this season. And so it's a good sign, but I think you want more. You want to be able to stack that performance on top of this one on Saturday. Look, Northern Illinois is 0-6 in conference play, but golly, I mean, you're 3-3 in conference. You were 2-3 moments ago going into Central Michigan. You're tied with 16 seconds to play, and it takes a foul and a 3-point attempt that gives you that game after the series of runs there. So you were staring 2-4 in the face, and then coming into the Saturday, you probably would have said that's a must win. You can't possibly lose to Northern Illinois. Now you're looking at this and saying, absolutely, you'd be disappointed if you lost on Saturday. But it's more of, golly, you win that game, you're 4-3 in the MAC. So again, it's just stacking those things on top of one another, and things come quickly in conference and things shift very quickly in conference. But hey, the opportunity's there on Saturday for Ball State.
And things seem to be trending in the right direction. But you look at this Ball State team, Mark, and you see a team that's 3-3 in conference play, yet we know they have that top 5 talent in terms of Mid-American Conference teams. So what does this team need to do right now? What do they need to change at 3-3 to match that top 5 talent that you think they have?
To be honest, I don't think they really need to change anything. I think that they've got a clearly set rotation. And you think about it too, and I know Coach Lewis, I've had conversations with him about this, about the starting lineup and lineup shifting and all those different things. And I laugh because it's one of the things he doesn't want to talk about much because it really, and his point obviously is valid. The players that were getting the rotational minutes for the most part, we're still getting those whether they were starting or whether they weren't. The really only player that his minutes have really changed the most is freshman TJ Birch. But ultimately, I think that this lineup has really settled in. You've got, and again, it was a shift for Ethan Britton Watts to go to the bench. It was a shift for Peyton to come off the bench, early in the season, and now he's back. So I don't know if there's much that needs to change. I think it's, it sounds cliche, and I sound like a coach when I say this, but they just need to lock in on both ends of the floor. And in that 26-7 run they had against Central Michigan on Tuesday, again, you just see those glimpses of saying, what if you put this together for 40 minutes? And so, but I think Ball State's in the same scenario as a lot of teams in the Mid-American Conference. So I don't know if there's much changing. Shot selection, the turnovers, I think, is a part that down the stretch is something that every coach is going to want to fine tune. But if you're playing with effort and energy and all those different things, and turnovers happen with going full speed, okay, that might be the only thing that you say, hey, they really need to fine tune turnovers because it's going to be super significant down the stretch in must-win games.
Yeah, we talked about it earlier. 19 turnovers against Central Michigan on Tuesday, but they managed to win the game. They had 7 against Toledo on Saturday, and they lost. So, but I'll ask you one question before we turn the page to women's basketball. You talked about the glimpses of what this team can put together if they can play like that for 40 minutes. Michael Lewis has said, and every coach, when they kind of set their goals a championship, right? Their goals to win the conference championship. Is that something you feel is attainable for this team this year?
Yeah, I do. That to some may sound a little bit overextending, but you look at the Mid-American Conference tournaments and it really hasn't been beneficial for top 4 seeds, So I think if you come in playing good, consistent basketball by the time you get there, and I know we're talking about something Ball State didn't do last year. They didn't make the tournament last year. So step one is make the tournament, which you're in position, and I think you'll be in better position if you have a positive performance on Saturday. That being said, I believe it was last year, right? That Kent State 7 or 8 seed made the conference championship game. So the opportunities are there. We see this across the country, right? Where it's not the number one seed. Toledo failed to reach the Mid-American Conference title, winning the regular season last year. So ultimately, that's why I feel like it's attainable, because of the way the conference tournament doesn't really benefit the top 4 or 5 seeds. And so, I still feel, I've told you this, Griffin, I think Miami of Ohio is the best team in the league. It's the best team I've seen so far. Haven't seen Akron yet, but obviously they're always very well run. Toledo, again, I think you just got kind of overwhelmed there in the second half a little bit. Ultimately, I think you're just as good as Toledo. And then Ohio, loses to Eastern Michigan after they just beat you last week. So, again, I think you're really talking about two teams at the top in Akron and Miami of Ohio. And outside of that, could Ball State have beaten Miami of Ohio when they were here on that Tuesday night? They could have. So I don't necessarily see any team that Ball State can't beat in this conference, and especially in a one-game scenario at a neutral site in Cleveland. That even raises the stakes for teams that are seeded 5 through 8.
There's a ton of parity in the league right now. I think we can all agree on that.
Absolutely.
Even on the women's side of things, there is a lot of parity outside of Ball State. We seem to be the only team that has really found our footing consistently in the conference. And I know you have done a little bit more work, at least on the air, with the men's team, Mark. But on the women's side of things, what's your analysis of this team right now? Undefeated in MAC play. What has gone right in your opinion?
Well, what I've kind of caught up with on them this season, and it's an extension of last year, because we know that there's a significant continuity, right? But ultimately, they kind of are they're going after their own standard. It's not, hey, we want to be at the top of the league. No, it's like everything's internal for them, and they're driven by their own standard. And golly, that sounds like the most media thing I've ever said in my life, but I've talked about it on my show a little bit. It's like nothing really phases them, and it doesn't feel like any outside noise influences what they're trying to get done collectively. And there's a reason why they're undefeated in Mid-American Conference play, and their best player, Allie Becky, could average 25, 7, and 7 if she wanted to. She doesn't need to. She wants to win. And so she might be the Mid-American Conference Player of the Year. I know a couple games ago she dropped 25 because it was needed in that game. But the ability for them to just all blend in together is not something we see a lot in college sports right now, because there's players that came in to want to be a part of this, but the real core of this team comes with the core 4, as they call them, right? Where they decided to stay, and everything is around those 4 players. And so Ball State women's basketball is the anti-transfer portal NIL scenario right now in mid-major sports, because they've added to people that want to play for this team, but they've had players that wanted to stay and wanted to be something bigger than themselves. And so they just beat to their own standard. Hey, we're going to get to Buffalo with an hour to spare, and we're going to beat Buffalo by 20. Okay, that's cool. They kind of shrug their shoulders and say, did that again. And then they're also very good about getting after themselves. They had a double-figure win in their second Mid-American Conference game, and they were frustrated by the way they played. So then the next game, they beat Eastern Michigan by 30. It's just they are so well-balanced, and it starts at the top, but I think the players take ownership as well, and they beat to their own standard. That's truly what it is.
Yeah, so we'll talk about results and all of that, but we were kind of dancing near the topic, so I want to ask you, we talked about the core 4 and how they are here, they want to win, and it's kind of been just a nice breath of fresh air, kind of away from the transfer portal and everything going on in NCAA athletics right now. But when those 4 graduate, should we expect this same standard, or do you think that the Cardinals will eventually kind of have the same troubles as a lot of other programs are having right now?
Remains to be seen. I don't know how to answer that question, and it's something certainly that I think that coaching staff's probably aware of. But look, you enjoy the ride right now because you've got a group that has committed to wanting to be here and be a part of this. Back in the mid 2000s, 10s, Ball State was competing at the top of the MAC with Natalie Fontaine and just very consistent groups, all the way back to late 2000s. So, they'll be a factor in the Mid-American Conference. Maybe the way that they construct the roster is going to be different because it is unique. But I don't know if you could foresee the types of players you bring in and what they're going to be about after their first year, after their second year. But in this case, this group has wanted to stay together and wanted to do something big. And I would say that they're well on their way to accomplishing big things. So.
In terms of doing something big, I had this scenario posed to me a couple of weeks ago, and it was just a fascinating one to me. The scenario, it was a fill in the blank. It was Ball State women's basketball will win the MAC championship because. What is your answer to that? What is your because?
Ooh, on the spot, I mean, I think the biggest thing is they know right now every game they play against an opponent, that opponent is going after them. They are the standard in the league. So, what I guess here's maybe to kind of backtrack a little bit. No coach wants to lose games, but coaches know when they lose games that it provides their group to be at attention and want to get better. So what does it look like in conference play for them to have an adversity situation, and how do they overcome that is, I think, what they might say, because maybe they will. Maybe they'll go unscathed in conference play and win the Mid-American Conference Championship. That's very hard to do. So, that's a good question. I would say if they keep the same level they're at right now, I don't see a team that is going to challenge them that way. But again, it's a flip side of what we talked about with the men's team a little bit. The women's team is likely going to be the 1 seed. And once again, on the women's side, it hasn't been favorable to top seeds in a conference tournament neutral site scenario. I mean, they went in last year battling with Toledo, same thing, and both teams didn't make the conference championship. So how do you properly address being in the moment during conference play and you have a 2-game week to when you get to the end of the season? And what are those conversations like with players that have played at Cleveland and you're going to be a 1 or 2 seed again? What's different and how do you prepare differently? Or how do you approach that situation differently or change focus? That'll be the interesting part at the end of the year. And I know we're looking far ahead, but it's what everybody's got on their mind. So.
Yeah, the Cardinals have found ways to continuously play at a high level game to game. Even if they're not playing at their 100% best, they're still finding a way to win ball games. But coming up a little stretch where they host Western, they host Bowling Green, you go on the road to James Madison in the back half of the MAC SBC Challenge. I guess if you're the Cardinals, how do you maintain that high level game to game as the schedule just continues to become such the grind that it is?
Well, I'll tell you this. This team enjoys being around each other. I know you hear that a lot about teams, and when you're winning, everything seems to be pretty golden. But this team I think that's a big part of why they've stayed together, is because they just enjoy playing together. They enjoy getting ice cream after wins. They enjoy doing all those different things. And so I don't know if they look at it as a grind. Like teams that are battling to establish themselves, they know they're established. They know everybody's going to give them their best shot, and they just enjoy those things. So, maybe the grind kind of comes into play if there's adversity in conference play in any form or fashion. But ultimately, I don't know if they look at it as a grind or just a tough stretch. Last week having 3 games in 5 days. Okay, we'll win all 3. It's just like they just shrug their shoulders in these moments, and it's fun to watch. It really, really is. But after that, you see them flat out enjoying every moment, every individual player that has success. Coach Brady Sally getting 150 wins. They find ways to celebrate those things. That's what it comes down to. But no doubt about it, I think the urgency and the intensity will pick up as the weeks go on. No question.
One more little thing to chew on from me. This is a team that currently sits top 50 in the net rankings, and they're undefeated in conference play right now. If Ball State, this is a big if, but if they run the table heading into the conference tournament, do they need to be conference champions to make the NCAA tournament? Or, in your opinion, does being undefeated in conference play in the MAC get them an at-large bid?
Well, I'll look at it from 2 different angles. If you're looking from the outside looking in, I mean, the resume would be there if this continues to roll, and that net ranking is going to continue to drop in a positive way because I think the teams ahead of them are going to lose games in their respective conferences where it's maybe less likely that Ball State women's basketball does it, but less teams in the women's NCAA basketball tournament, right? Am I right in that? I'm pretty sure, right?
I think it's 68.
It is. They are.
There's 68, so maybe I'm wrong in that. So, again, this is an apples to apples comparison. How did Indiana State feel last year in the men's side? And they should have been in. I mean, I still feel that way. They should have been in resume-wise and net ranking and all those different things. The resume, there's no question about it. So again, you're not necessarily looking at it from that perspective, but I think driven inside, if you're looking at it inside the program, you don't even have to worry about the net stuff if you take care of the conference championship. So, and again, every team's giving them their best shot. So they make a conference title game, they lose. We'll be talking about that leading up to it because right now where they stand in the net, they're right on the bubble they would be if the season ended today and they didn't win a conference championship. So I don't think that there's any sort of focus saying, let's just do all we can in the regular season and our net ranking will take care of itself because Ball State baseball had this situation as well where they had a high net ranking. It didn't help them. Indiana State, we just talked about. So there's been a lot of mid-major teams that have had net ranking be pretty darn high, and it hasn't helped them. So anyway, I don't. It's a fun conversation to have. If they would have won one more Power 5 non-conference game, and they came in with 3 losses in the Mid-American Conference play and ran the table, and there were a couple there with against mid-major teams, especially that they probably could have won. I think that would have been more of a predominant conversation, but I think you just take care of what you need to take care of, and the rest will take care of itself.
Yeah, obviously a lot of what ifs between now and then, and I'll say if they did lose that game Saturday, that 24 hours before Selection Sunday would be quite the nervy stretch. So we'll hope it doesn't get there. Mark, thanks for joining us. We appreciate you taking some time out of your lovely what is that, a Honda studio?
That's right. No acoustics better than a Honda CRV, right?
Well, Mark, we appreciate your time, and we look forward to seeing you at Ball State basketball here in the future.
You got it, guys. Thanks. We'll love to do it again sometime.
Of course. We'll step aside here on the Cards Court. When we get back, Sam and I will hit you with our bold predictions for the week, and we'll send you on your way. This is the Cards Court presented by Victory Honda of Muncie here on SportsLink Digital Radio.
Victory Honda of Muncie. We're not just another car dealership, and here's why. We stand behind every car we sell and are dedicated to helping our customers save time and money. All our pre-owned cars undergo a rigorous 182-point inspection and come with a 90-day warranty to ensure that you're getting a Victory quality vehicle. Plus, you'll get 2 years of complimentary oil changes and tire rotations. We're part of a top 15 dealership group and have an enormous selection of vehicles with access to inventory at over 45 locations. You always get more for your trade and the best possible rates with us. We have an excellent relationship with hundreds of lenders. Our exclusive Car Doc maintenance and membership program will help you save hundreds of dollars in the process of maintaining your vehicle. Lastly, our state-of-the-art body shop and certified technicians perform high-quality repairs and paintwork on most vehicle makes and models. Victory Honda of Muncie. We're not just another car dealership.
Welcome back inside the Cards Court here, presented by Victory Honda of Muncie inside the Betsy M. Ross Studios in SportsLink. A big thank you. Before the break, we talked to Mark Foerster of Wolf Boom Radio. Now it's Griffin and Sam once again. To wrap things up, let's go through our weekly schedule here as we get ready for next week's action. Should be a good couple of games coming up. Let's start with the women's side. Saturday at DeKalb, Illinois, taking on the Northern Illinois Huskies. That's the second part of a doubleheader as the men's team is out there as well. And then Wednesday, the women's group goes to Athens, Ohio, out to visit the Bobcats of Ohio University. On the men's side, as before mentioned, Northern Illinois on the schedule. That game in DeKalb, Illinois on ESPN+. And then the Cardinals host Western Michigan. That will be a Ball State SportsLink ESPN Plus production. We hope you join us on ESPN Plus if you can't be there in the arena to see it live. Sam, thoughts on the schedule? Let's start with the women's side with a couple of games on the horizon.
Well, obviously, Northern Illinois is something that jumps off the page at you because that was the game, that was the arena last year where Ball State dropped the one they didn't want to. That loss on the road against a Northern Illinois team that proved to be much worse than the Cardinals, that proved to ultimately lose Ball State its top spot in the Mid-American Conference. Did that ultimately affect their ability to win a championship? Not exactly, because they did lose in the semifinals, but the Cardinals wanted that regular season championship. They feel they were robbed of that. They cannot have a repeat performance of that this year. I think Ball State is better this year. I think they learned from their mistakes from last season against DeKalb. But Northern Illinois, that's a tough place to play. Ball State has to make sure that they are locked in. It's an earlier tip. Thankfully, it's an afternoon tip. It's 2 o'clock here, 1 o'clock over at Northern Illinois. But if the Cards are able to play with the dominance in which they have up to this point, that should be no problem. And I think the same can be said against Ohio. It's a midweek Maction game on the road. Those Wednesdays are kind of a lull waiting for tip-off, but Ball State was ready to go against Kent State. They were ready to go against Buffalo on the road. I don't necessarily see why Ohio would be any different.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, it'll be a couple of interesting road games. As you mentioned, NIU were able to beat the Cardinals last season, but Ohio wasn't an easy matchup on the road last year either. The Cards were able to win that one by 15, but of course the new year turns and it's a different roster, it's a different season. You expect the Cardinals to win both of these games handily, but if history shows, there's no easy road wins in the Mid-American Conference. Turning to the men's team, a couple of big games against very winnable games. Their next 3 matchups are against the 3 bottom teams in the conference standings as it stands right now. And with 2 matchups coming up this week, you feel you've got to win at least 1, but if you can win 2, the Cardinals would be in a phenomenal spot.
And I think it's super important to win the Tuesday game against Western Michigan at home because that is the middle game of a 5-game stretch where Ball State plays on the road, then they play at home once, and then they've got 2 more games on the road. If the Cards can come into Worthen Arena on January 28th on a 2-game win streak, which means a win against the worst team in the Mid-American Conference on the road against Northern Illinois, and they were able to hold down the fort at home against Western Michigan, that could do wonders for this Ball State team. Just going back to what Mark was saying just a minute ago, this is a team that in a couple of weeks is going to be in much better standing in the MAC right now. In the MAC than they are right now, I should say. This is a team that's 3-3 right now, that by the end of the week could be 5-3 and pushing into the upper echelons of the conference. This is a Ball State team that has some very winnable games in front of them. If they're able to pull it off, that could do wonders for making the Mid-American Conference tournament in March.
Absolutely, and you talked about Northern Illinois being one of those games last year where the history kind of comes into play. There's no game on Ball State men's basketball schedule this year that rings more true to that fact than Western Michigan, and I know you have a pretty personal experience with that game. Good old, are you kidding me?
Are you kidding me? That was my genuine reaction. For those that don't know, we're referring to the buzzer beater that Western Michigan had last year, courtesy of Anthony Crump on a last-second full-court bounce pass to tap it in and steal a game from the Cardinals at home. It was absolutely gut-wrenching. It really kind of was the final blow to Ball State in the season. So they've got an extra chip on their shoulder because of that, especially against Western Michigan. With it being at home, they don't want to let that happen again. There's going to be some fun storylines to look at. I think that's going to be a really fun game, and SportsLink is pretty blessed to cover that one because there is going to be a little extra chutzpah with which these teams are fighting.
Absolutely. Really looking forward to that call. We're going to step aside real quick. When we get back, we'll have your bold predictions for the week, but not before this quick word from Mick Tidrow.
For the best stories, access, and coverage of Ball State sports, follow SportsLink on social media platforms Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and Snapchat. Search @BSU SportsLink.
Welcome back here to the Cards Court presented by Victory Honda of Muncie as we wrap things up this afternoon. Sam, bold predictions time, and we'll start with women's basketball for these 2 games. What do you got?
Griffin, I'm going to go a little out of bounds on you here just because Ball State has that doubleheader on the road. I think that's a really interesting dynamic that we don't typically see a lot of these teams have. Now, they're on the road at Northern Illinois, the men's and women's team. I think the combined plus or minus between these 2 games is going to be plus 30. I think Ball State women's basketball wins big, and I think the men are able to gut it out, maybe get a double-digit victory. all things considered, by Saturday evening, I think we are going to see plus 30 between Ball State men's and women's basketball on the road against Northern Illinois. Should be a fun Saturday for Cardinals fans.
Okay, and then do you have an additional men's prediction?
Yeah, I'll give you a men's prediction as well. I think that game against Western Michigan, because they have such an extra chip on their shoulder, one of the only players that does remember that is Mickey Pearson. He had a heck of a performance against Central Michigan as well. He was the team's leading scorer with 16 points. I think he either matches or beats that 16-point total. I'm not saying he's going to be the leading scorer on Ball State in that game, but I think 16 or more from Mickey Pearson against Western Michigan is a reasonable goal and one that could definitely give the Cardinals the advantage they need to take down the Broncos at home.
Well, and Mickey Pearson had a couple of huge shots in that Western Michigan game as well.
He did.
And they were for nothing.
Yeah, he played really well. He's always good in the clutch. It's just whether or not his team's going to be able to rally around him to actually get the win done. Put that little check in the win column.
All right, and then on my side, women's basketball, we talked about Allie Becky. We talked with Mark just about how good she's been and how well she's been able to spread the ball out to her teammates. It seems like she should be at 5 or 6 double-doubles by now. She hasn't had a double-double, in fact, since her triple-double at Memphis earlier in the season.
Isn't
she
that
hasn't
crazy?
had one in Mid-American Conference play.
That is crazy.
Honestly, it's insane, but I think it ends here. I think it ends this week. I'm not going to give it a specific game, but I think we see an Allie Becky double-double before the next time we're on this show. And then on the men's basketball side, the Western Michigan game, it's on the back of my mind. It's just such a heartbreaker from last year. You want to see the Cardinals get it done, and I think we're going to have a close game. And I'll tell you, I think this game on Tuesday is going to be decided in the final 2 possessions between the Cardinals and the Broncos. Expect a nail-biter in Muncie on Tuesday night.
It always seems that those games are good, whether or not it's a buzzer beater, whether or not it's one of the craziest plays of the college basketball calendar this year. That matchup, regardless of where those teams stack out in the Mid-American Conference, seems to be a good one, especially on the floor of Worth and Griff.
Well, Sam, it's been a fun week. We're looking forward to running it back again next week.
As always, it's always great to get to not only hash out Ball State basketball with you, but to get members of this Ball State basketball community and the Muncie community involved as well. I enjoy doing it, no doubt.
We've got one more week in January after this, and then it's the home stretch, folks. We're getting toward the end of the 2024-2025 season. Big thanks to Sam for always being on, and Mark Foerster for joining us earlier on this afternoon. I'm Griffin Leonard, saying so long from Ball State Sports Link inside the Betsy M. Ross Studios. This has been the Cards Court, presented by Victory Honda of Muncie. We'll see you next week.